it's going to be. In doing a deal outside of the normal real estate MLS realtor type system, the biggest issue besides valuation and making sure that you have upside potential is title. Title is something that in a MLS realtor type situation, handed to you on a silver platter. They do the title search, they do the complete closing and escrow. You may have tens of thousands of dollars in closing costs, or at least in the five figures. So that's something that you're saving that much money on a foreclosure deal, but you got to do a lot of the due diligence yourself. It's something that is part of that money savings that the investors take advantage of, in addition to not paying retail for a property. You pay wholesale, you save on closing costs, but you got to do a little legwork yourself. Title being one of them, inspection being another part of it as well. But clear title is the biggest part of making that deal a success that's outside of your control. The valuation and analyzing the deal, that's something in your control as an investor. The title is something that is the biggest issue outside of your control on that deal. A story that I like to tell is, a few years ago we had a client call up who had purchased a property through a real estate auction, presumably got a really good deal. It's a property that they thought had a valuation about $1 million, 1.1 million possibly, and they bought the property for about $600,000 at auction. So they were thinking big upside potential. Come to find out, when we ran that title search, in this case it was after the fact, that mortgage that was foreclosed was actually a second mortgage. It wasn't the primary loan on that property. There was a first mortgage in first place position in the amount of $700,000. So you add them together, you got 1.3. I don't remember if there were any other liens, but even just with those two, it put the property out of equity. The sad part is, the terms and conditions of that auction were that the buyer had to put 50% of their bid as a cashier's check at the time of the close of the sale, when the hammer dropped on the auction. So they were already out 300 grand. Now they could walk away from that $300,000 deposit, not pay the balance, but still that $300,000 is gone. So was a good lesson learned, to make sure that your title is well researched before you get into an auction situation. Title searching is as much of an art as it is a science. So those of you who are investors, you've been there, you've been in the land records rooms, you know what it's like. Those documents are all over the place, and you got to put them together into a good title search. So let me talk about a couple of the questions that come up from investors quite frequently. One of the ones that we talked to somebody this morning was, when you get a property from a distressed sale, an auction, or it might even be a short sale, in many cases you're going to get what's called a quitclaim deed. Quitclaim deed is simply that auctioneer, it may be the municipal government, it may be some other entity, is going to just sign over saying, look, whatever rights we have in the property, we're quitclaiming them to you. Doesn't guarantee anything. They may not have any rights. So it's up to the buyer to make sure you do your due diligence on the title before you get into that situation. Quitclaim deed is the deed that offers the least amount of protection, the least amount of transfer for the buyer. And in an auction, that's going to be very common. You're going to see that in almost every case. The quitclaim is going to be the deed type of preferred signature that's going to come from that seller or that transfer. So look for that on foreclosure deals. Let me explain a little bit about how a title search is done for those of you who are not familiar with it. If you look at the bottom of this page, lower down, you'll see a picture of a bunch of books. It looks like a library. That's literally what the land records facility that we look at will have for the records. Each document that goes into a title, could be a deed, could be a mortgage, could be a lien, is going to be filed in one of those books. Now here is what makes it more difficult. They're not all filed together by property. What happens is, if you bring down a deed to a property for recording, it goes in the book for that day. Somebody else brings down a mortgage for another property 5 minutes later, it goes right behind it in that book, and so on. They're all chronological order. They're not put together by property addresses. They're put together by the date. So how do you find them? You have 12 Main Street as your foreclosed property. You want to find all the records that go into it. What you have to do is look at the name index to look for the name that would be on that lien, mortgage, judgment, whatever it is, and it'll tell you all the books that any records with that name are located. So you might think that that's the end of it. Well, when you pull all those records, it will have every single lien, mortgage that's ever been issued in that name, even ones that have been closed out, paid off, refinanced, what have you. And then you'll have to find those separate documents, a mortgage release, a lien release, and match them up and see which ones are cleared off. So the title search is a manual process, usually about a 5 to 9 man-hour process for a professional certified title abstractor. Some investors do some of that work yourself. We'll get into that a little bit later about what types of things you can do yourself, and we'll give you some good tips on how to do that. So a title search is a manual process. If you are using an outside resource to do some title searching for you, whether it be a title company, whether it be a certified abstractor like us, or an attorney, ask that source how they do their search. Are they using electronic online records, or are they physically going to the books and pages and pulling them manually? Here's the reason why. The electronic online records may not be 100% complete. They may not be accurate as of that day. A lot of times the online records are uploaded maybe once a month, every couple months, and that's going to be something which will affect their currency. The other thing is, some sources are third-party sources, and they may not get all the records. They may only have deeds and mortgages and not liens. They may not have judgments. They may not have other records that could affect the title. So ask your provider, if they're using online or in person. A certified title abstractor, which is certified by NALTIA, the National Association of Land Title Examiners and Abstractors, use certain industry standards, title standards, that are very closely scrutinized. That certified abstractor will have to go through training, they'll have to pass exams, they'll have to do annual continuing education to prove that they are up to snuff on doing searches and making sure they're doing them according to good standards. So you want to make sure, look, you're saving a lot of money on a property, you're kind of shortcutting a lot of the expenses that go into buying real estate, but you're also at the risk of making sure the title's good, and that's going to be on you as an investor. Make sure you get a good title search. A good title search may cost $100, $150, maybe up to $200. It's not a place to shortcut. Make sure your title's done well, and ask them if they're using industry certified title standards, and if they are certified to do that, and if they're doing it themselves. Some title searches will sublet that out to another location. Some places even sublet it out overseas to be done remotely. So check into that. Look, this is the time for foreclosures. There's a lot of deals out there. The first batch of deals is coming out of these lenders. They're putting more foreclosures into the auction system, releasing them from being held in the foreclosure process. We're seeing a lot of our clients that we've been doing searches for 10 years plus, doing many more deals just in the last 90 days. So the opportunities are out there. It's an excellent industry to be in. You can save 20-30% off of retail plus the closing cost, and you could be $50,000-$60,000 ahead on a deal by looking at foreclosures if you do it the right way. If you're new to the industry, here's a recommendation. Run a couple deals through hypothetically, which means look at a property, look at the address, even maybe do some due diligence on the property. Look at the property title search, drive around the property, look at the condition, watch that property go through the auction system. Don't bid on it, just go and watch it, see who else bids on it, see what that process is like. Watch how the seller adjusts maybe their price, or how fast that they take bids, and then afterwards see what happens with that house. Go back a couple weeks later, see if that investor is fixing it up, see if it's offered for sale, see how much rehab goes into the property. You can even do what's called back testing, where you're walking a deal backwards in time. Find a property that was foreclosed maybe a year ago and has been through this process. How much was paid for it? Were there any permits pulled? How much work was done to it? How much was it listed for with a real estate agent? And then you can see how much it was actually sold for, and if that profit looks like it was a good deal. You can take a look at who's buying these properties. You can take a look at which realtors are selling them, and you can backwalk a deal to get an idea of how the process works without having to do it. You can virtually walk through it. These types of actions almost cost you nothing as an investor. You may spend a little time going to an auction, some time on gas. You may want to get a couple title searches, a couple $100 to see how the properties looked all the way through that deal. But that's a good way to get practice with these deals before you dive in and put tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars at stake. There's a lot of money to be made, but again, you want to know what you're dealing with. So I'm going to take a look and see what kind of questions we have from some visitors. One of the questions from one of you viewers is, what happens when there are defects in the mortgage assignments? Something that's come up quite a bit in the last few years, that mortgages were assigned from one lender to another. Not all of those assignments made it to the property title, right? They were done in either MERS or some nominee trustee system, some electronic transfer, and it's not on the title. Some borrowers have even used this as a reason to dispute their mortgage and maybe not be foreclosed or not get paid or not pay their mortgage. So those are examples where that mortgage assignment might put that at risk. If that mortgage has an assignment chain break prior to foreclosure, there are borrowers who will challenge the foreclosure even a year later. So if you're looking at your title, see if there's a very clean mortgage assignment chain that you can follow through to the lender who actually forecloses. That's a really good question. It's a really good question. Let's take a look at what else we got. Yeah, there's an article that was out this week from RealtyTrack looking at the best markets for foreclosures. They listed, of the large metro areas, which ones were the best markets for foreclosures and had the highest activity. Not surprisingly, a lot of them were in Florida. New York, New Jersey was a big area. Even Connecticut and some of the New England states had some activity. They ranked areas in Ohio and Indiana as good opportunities as well. We're seeing a lot of activity from our clients in Texas, in California, and Nevada. We're seeing a lot of orders for searches in those areas. It seems like those are kind of hot areas as well, in addition to that. Another piece of advice that might help you is, when you're ordering a title search or ordering any kind of due diligence, give yourself plenty of time. Make sure that you have a few days after you get your search before the auction is going to happen. Couple reasons. First is, you can look at the search. If you have questions, you can call up the title searcher, the abstractor, to get some explanations of what these records might mean. That'll help you quite a bit with understanding what the title's about, what liens are there, what might be opportunities. And here's one really great opportunity. If there's liens on the property, that's not necessarily a reason to walk away from the deal. Let's say there's a lien from a mechanic's lien from some contractor, didn't get paid for putting on a roof. Look, that contractor may have been out that money for years. And if you're an investor and it's a $10,000 lien, many other investors are simply going to walk away from that deal because they don't want to deal with that lien. Some investors might say, well, if the property's worth $300,000, I'm only going to bid it up to $290 because of this $10,000 lien. If you're smart, you might be able to contact that creditor prior to the auction and get some type of a discount of that lien, or get them to commit to you as an investor. If you buy the property and you give them cash within 30 days, they'll give you a letter saying, look, we'll accept less for this property. That'll give you an advantage over other investors who are just counting that whole entire lien amount into their calculations of value and equity. So take a couple days to look at that. This is very common with IRS tax liens. IRS has a lien against somebody, it attaches to their house because they didn't pay their income tax, and it's likely, look, somebody who's in foreclosure, who didn't pay their mortgage, probably has other debts they didn't pay either. It could be their IRS taxes, it could be if they're a business owner, state sales taxes on their business. Those are liens that can be negotiated. Most government agencies don't want to penalize legitimate third-party buyers. They want to keep real estate moving. They want to keep properties going. They don't want to penalize somebody who's trying to, get the economy and get some momentum going. So if you're an investor, third-party innocent investor, you're not the deadbeat who didn't pay their income tax, you can call up the IRS, the Treasury Department, and say, look, I'm buying this property. It's got a $50,000 tax lien on it. If I'm an investor, how much can I pay to have this taken off the property? Now, it won't eliminate that debt for the borrower, which is a good thing, but it may give you an advantage over having to pay that whole $50,000 lien to get it off your investment property. So think about these things as strategies. Again, there's no guarantee they will do this, but we're seeing investors telling us that sometimes the IRS will take 10 cents on the dollar to get a lien taken off a property if it's presented to them in the right way. So that's something else that might give you an advantage as an investor over others. Let's see what other subjects are on the chat board. Yeah, one of the things that comes up is investors who are looking at these properties as rental properties, and they're going to be a landlord and rent the property out either permanently or just to get some income while the market comes up. This is important to look at. One of the things for landlord issues is to make sure, first of all, that the zoning is allowed for that use. Single-family houses, in most cases, you can rent out. If it's in an HOA or a condo association, there may be restrictions on renting more than a certain percentage in that area. Some properties actually, even though they look like a residence, might actually be zoned commercial. And if it's zoned commercial, you may not be able to rent it or get a occupancy certificate for residency use. So that's one thing to look at on your title as well. There may also be lead-based paint in the property or asbestos, which might be on permit applications in the title search. You may have to make disclosures to a party based on that. If another thing you look at on title is maintenance. If there's been a lot of permits pulled and repairs made to that property, that might be something which affects future rentals. Number of bedrooms. Is it the right number of bedrooms? Is it a 4-bedroom house or a 3? Even if it looks like 4, one may have been a porch that had been closed in to make a 4th bedroom. May not be a legal bedroom to use. You may not be able to use that as a residential space. So that's pretty good. Another one of our clients just put a message too that they like to look at the title for a property on past residents or past applicants. So let's say you have an applicant wanting to rent your house. You look at the title of their last house they rented to see if the reference they're giving you on their application is really the owner. A lot of times people with bad rental backgrounds will just put down the name of their friend on the application as a reference, but in reality where they lived before, that's not the owner. So take a look at that. That's one of those things that can be a do-it-yourself type of title research, because the consequences aren't really that bad if you get that wrong. You want to try to use professionals where you can, especially when it comes to legal parts of doing foreclosure investing. And this is leads me to another subject. Here's your resources as an investor. You have your list sources, where you're going to get your foreclosure information. You have your title search sources to do due diligence. You're going to get legal advice on doing these deals, probably from an attorney or somebody who's an expert. You also want to get good tax and accounting advice. So here's a couple rules of thumb. On list sources, there are many dubious sources of stale and inaccurate lists. We've all heard about them. You've all seen where you buy a foreclosure list and the properties are way out of date. They've already been sold. They're no good. Some of the good sources out there, you can look at foreclosure.com. They have some great lists. You want to make sure you get an accurate list. Do some research on the sources of your list. Otherwise, you're going to be paying for nothing. It might save a few bucks, but you're going to get nothing. Title search, again, this is what we're talking about. You want to make sure it's not an electronic search. These two elements of your cost structure, a list source and title search, are so small as far as cost. They're not places to try and save money. You're not going to save that much money. If a list costs you $150 and you get it for free, you saved $150, but you may not have any value. A title search might cost you $150 or $200. Even if you got it for free, which would be tough, you're only saving a little bit of money, and you're putting your whole integrity of title at risk. So those are small areas. Another area is legal advice. You may not want to spend thousands of dollars on an attorney, but a way to do this alternately is approach an attorney, have them walk through one deal with you. Give them a hypothetical deal, even come up with one property that you're thinking about buying. Get some advice, have them tell you what are the pros and cons, what are the risks to look for, what are the legalities of buying the property, what's going to be your responsibility, and maybe if you're going to be renting the property, what goes along with renting it. And then you can copy that advice to other properties. You don't have to hire the attorney for every deal unless there's something substantially different, but get good qualified legal advice from an attorney who deals with this stuff, not just from any attorney that may not have experience with it. And then taxes is another issue. You know, there's a lot of advantages for doing investing in real estate for your income tax. You have three choices: do it yourself, TurboTax type electronic software, or CPA. Do it yourself has pretty much a zero cost other than your time. You might miss a great deduction that could save you thousands. You could maybe go with TurboTax that might cost you $50 or $100. But again, they may not know all the ins and outs of depreciation, expensing different items on your preparation for doing investing. So CPA might cost a few $100s, but could be a source of finding thousands in tax deductions. So compare those three options as you're doing it. And either way, make sure all the professionals and advisors you work with and get advice from are legit. Check if they have actual experience. You're going to run into a lot of so-called experts on chat boards and message boards and internet websites that claim to know things. If you're asking a legal question, you're not going to know where that information comes from. Do they even know the answer to that? If you ask them, is it legal to rent a house to somebody in this scenario, or to do a certain type of lease, and they say yes, you can. If it comes later that wasn't legal, you can't go back to that person and say, hey, what was wrong with your advice? You're going to be in trouble, or have to pay the fine, or have to refund a security deposit. So get good legal advice. Make sure the advisors are professionals and they have experience. If you want to save $500 on a new heater, that's legitimate. You want to save thousands of dollars by negotiating a lien, that's good. But saving hundreds on not getting good advice up front might not be the best thing, because you only have to pay that once, and then that advice is good. So it's good suggestion to get really good legal advice on your deals. Another viewer is asking, well, how much money can you make on foreclosure deals, and how much experience do you have to have? Another story I can remember very vividly is talking to a woman who called me up. Again, coincidentally, it happened to be after they bought the property. And in this case, they got lucky. It was a woman in South Carolina, it was probably in 2004, who had bought a property for about $18,000, and she wanted to run a title search on it after the fact. A little bit scary. So we ran the search, come to find out everything was fine. And she said, from now on, I'll get title searches before I buy the property. There were no other liens. And I got to talking with her, and she had almost accidentally come across this property. She was actually looking for a death notice in the newspaper for a friend of hers that she thought had been deceased, and came across this foreclosure notice. and she happened to know the street, know the neighborhood. She went and kind of looked at it, and it looked like a decent house. She was familiar with that style of house because she had lived in a house similar to it, a mile or two away. And just on a whim, she went to the auction. She had a little bit of money, and she bought the property. And this woman was in her 70s or 80s, and she paid $18,000 for it, had her brother help her paint it, or relatives help her fix it up a little bit, and sold it for close to $40,000. So she made, $15,000, $20,000 profit at least, if not more. And the next time she looked at a property, she called up, get a title search, asked her about how that deal went. She said, Dave, I made $30,000. I don't know that I've ever made $30,000 in my life in a year. She never had a job that had made that much in a year, and she made it on one deal. And the story got even more interesting. She was fourth generation descendant of a slave in South Carolina, so to her this was a really big deal, and it changed her life, that $20,000 or $30,000. So the deals are out there, they can be made. Again, do your due diligence. She got really lucky in that there weren't any liens, but in her case it worked out just fine. So yeah, there's money to be made. The worst deal, people ask all the time, what's a bad deal? The worst deal is a deal that you don't make. If you never actually step foot in the industry and do a real estate deal, you're never going to have the opportunity. The worst deal is the one that you walk away from or don't do in the first place. So there's a lot of things you want to check out. There's some things that might be scary about getting into foreclosures, but if you don't do a deal, you're literally losing money on every deal you didn't do. So jump in and do one, maybe do some due diligence and do a hypothetical, what we call a ghost deal. Walk it through to see if it would have been profitable if you did it. It's kind of like some stock day traders will do the same thing. They'll say, pretend I bought this stock on this day. They watch it for a week and see if they made money. Well, pretend you bought a property at an auction. Pick one out, pretend you bid a certain amount, walk it through. It may take months to find out if it would have worked out, if it gets sold, but at least you'll know how your decisions are and what the process looks like from the outside. And that's why back walking a deal can be helpful to look at that. So you can watch it from afar, so to speak, but the worst deal you can do is the one you don't ever dive into. The other examples of title search quirks that can come to bite you if you don't do a title search the right way are the weird situations. Look, if you look at a property and you look at the title and there's a lien for XYZ Bank has a lien on it, it's easy to see. But then if you see that lien's released, you might think there's no problem. We did a search last week where there was a lien release that was rescinded, which had the effect of putting the lien back on. So there's a lien from a bank. Actually, it was a mortgage in this case. The mortgage supposedly was paid off. A release was filed. The mortgage comes off the property. Sometime later, that bank signed an affidavit, put it in the records that rescinded that release. So now the mortgage is back on. Here's the worst problem. That affidavit was not in the land records. It was in a third generation source of documents. It was actually in what's called the general index. So you wouldn't have to know as a title researcher to look in that index to find that affidavit that takes that release back. So an average, maybe first-time title searcher might not have found it and would have gone ahead figuring that mortgage was not on the property. There's a lot of different places you have to look for title records. The land records is one. Civil court judgment is another. You need to look at probate records if somebody's been deceased on the property and an heir to the person who died had any interest. If a lien landed on that heir during that time, now it's on the property. If somebody gets divorced, their name might change. So you might be searching for a maiden name or a married name and miss liens on another name. A lot of names can come into title from different purposes, and if you don't look for all those names, you might miss a lien. In some parts of the country, there's even fourth or fifth sources of records that have to be searched. In Pennsylvania, there's a source called the Prothonotary Records that has other liens and judgments that go against property. UCC records with the Secretary of State, famous for having records against properties. You may find that you have to look at federal records for bankruptcies. If somebody's in bankruptcy, that's not going to be filed in the local court, it'll be in federal court. So there's a lot of places to look for those properties. or for those records on properties. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time giving you foreclosure investor clients some ideas on how we can assist as a certified title examiner to give you some information on properties to, number one, help you avoid the risk and liability when you buy a property, but also to help you do your deals in the first place. If you want to take a look further, our website called titlesearchblog.com has about 300 articles about titles and real estate and liens and mortgages. Many of those have to do with foreclosure investing. You can get some good ideas there. This video page has, I think, a couple hundred videos that might give you information on liens and how to invest in properties. But we'll have these live events occasionally. So if you are a customer that buys title searches, or even a potential client, let us know. We'll put you on the list. You can see these live videos as they come and get some good information. And of course, if you do have questions and you have a particular example of a deal you're trying to do or some mechanism of investing in foreclosures that you want to know about, call us up. We have a dedicated department to foreclosure investors. One last question I see popping up is, what do I do with running title searches on properties when I don't know if I'm going to end up buying them at the auction? That comes up a lot, especially with new investors looking at a big list of properties at an auction. The rule of thumb that many investors try to cling to is 12-to-1 rule. And 12-to-1 rule means that you may look at 12 properties before you buy one, because there's other bidders. Some properties get pulled from auctions. Some properties just won't meet your criteria of value based on how high it bids. So you're going to have to chase 10 or 12 properties just to buy one, which is okay. Now, what about the title searches? You may have to buy a title search on those 12 properties. And that might cost you $1,500, $2,000 to buy title searches. Well, that's just, in many cases, what the investor looks at as the cost of doing business for that one property. So if it costs you $1,500 or a couple thousand of title searches to get that one deal, it's a lot less than paying $10,000 in closing costs or paying $40,000 or $50,000 more for a retail property, to get that same one deal. So look at some of these expenses like legal advice, like buying the list, and tax advice as part of that business due diligence and cost of doing business on foreclosure investing. We recommend make sure that you do all of that research ahead of time. Get your legal advice from an attorney, get some good tax advice, and do some reading in online venues. You may see Bigger Pockets as a good source. There's other really good sources of foreclosure investor information. But make sure that when you're making a decision based on advice that has to be right, legal advice, title advice, you're getting it from somebody who has the right answer, and it's not just an online deal. And the last thing is, look, you can't do a deal on internet chat rooms. At some point, you have to get your information and get out there and do a deal, get out there and start watching them. Internet chat rooms are just virtual. They're not the real marketplace. So get out there and do some deals. And if you do have questions, call us up anytime. Again, our website's titlesearch.com. You'll find us there, and one of our foreclosure experts will talk to you. Appreciate you being on the event. If you have other questions, you can send them by email or look for the next event that's coming up. Catch you next time.